Did I ever tell you that I'm from the South? Yeah, I'm from the South, born and raised. But unfortunately, I live someplace else. But that's okay, because I know where I come from and I treasure it wholeheartedly. Those that live in the South know it can be a beautiful place, but it could also be quite frightening. For all my Southern belles and Southern gentlemen, Southern non binary, comment in the comment section. What do you love about the South, where you're from specifically, and what absolutely terrifies you? And on that note, let's begin. If you want to understand why I left the place I was at, you're really just going to have to hear the entire story. You won't believe it, of course, but your skepticism means nothing. What I saw that night on the bayou has been with me ever since. In my mind, my thoughts, and sometimes even my dreams. It exists as a disturbing memory that I cannot shake away, that will never go away, just as long as I live. It will be one of those things so terrifying that it will still be just as keen in my mind on my deathbed as it was the day it occurred. But whether or not you believe me, I'll tell it to you anyway. If not only to serve as a warning, a plea for caution, if you ever find yourself near the swamps late at night. At the time, I was working at a lovely little fast food place. The only thing worse than working at a lovely fast food place is working at a lovely fast food place on the night shift. Without a car and by yourself. Especially when you just so happen to live in the heart of rural Louisiana. Such was my case some years ago, the night this event happened to me. During this time, I lived quite a few miles away from the restaurant I worked at. And due to my lack of a vehicle or any access to a public bus system, I was dependent on others for my transportation to and from work. One night, after a busy evening of serving customers, I closed the store and locked up the restaurant. When I phoned for my ride, nobody answered. Now, I'm not here to throw a pity party, but I can't help but to express anger at the fact that the person who drove me to and fro to work was my roommate, who had a car but no freaking job, and I was basically the only person in our house who paid the rent at this time. This loser had the carelessness to fall asleep, leaving me with no freaking option but to walk again. This was not the first time that this had happened. Oh no, because the first time this had happened, it literally took me an hour and a half to get home. And that's me walking briskly. And to those of you who have never been to the rural regions of Louisiana, oh, you have no clue. Here we have what is called a bayou. It's basically a swamp. Thick, murky, moist, frog-laden, mosquito-swarming, gator-infested, crappy-smelling swamp with thick tall grass, cattails, cypress trees, and heaves of pond scum. And I just so happen to live on the bayou, all the way down a long dirt road with hardly any streetlights and thick swamp on both sides of the road. There are no side roads, and the houses down this street are separated sometimes by more than a quarter-mile apart. It's not merely spooky walking down this road at night. It's freaking terrifying. You hear sounds, both real and imagined, coming from the bayou. Chirping, croaking, howling, grunting animals, the rustling of leaves and branches in the canopy of the cypress trees, and the slashing water from underneath them. You can literally hear the sound of something lurking nearby abruptly dunk under the water. It can be a turtle, a snake, or even an alligator. You never know. You just keep walking with your teeth and hands clenched tight, hoping nothing crawls through the tall grass next to you and onto the road. Or even worse than the subtle dunking sounds, the sudden splashes that happen when you're walking and scare a toad or frog and it jumps into the water. You almost poop yourself as you begin a running spree that lasts about 3 seconds before you realize what it was. And then you're left with your heart pounding so hard that the sound of your blood gushing in your temples scare you just as much. These are the types of things that happen when you're in the bayou. This is what I had to look forward to when my roommate decided to fail me. Goody me. After blowing up his phone like a crazy ex, I eventually gave up. And having just about no other friends to contact in the area as a recourse, I stopped by the nearby gas station, grabbed an energy drink, and began my ways back home. Now, you must understand the first 30 or so minutes of my walk isn't that bad. I'm still in the most populated part of the town, and there are 3 streetlights, stores, houses, and cars passing by in large numbers. That's important. If there are a lot of cars going by, you feel safer than when there are very few cars going by. Because when there are only 1 or 2 cars that pass you every 3 minutes, that means that there could be a psychopath in one of those cars. And they may have enough time to stop by and murder you without being caught. I know, I have quite an imagination. But in the world we live in, is it really an imagination? Point being, if there are a lot of cars passing by, that means there's a lot of witnesses, meaning a psychopath will think twice before murdering you. But I digress. Next, there comes a time in my journey where I have to turn down several suburban neighborhoods and walk some streets to get where I am going. Here's where things get a little less safe, and I have to be a little more cautious. You never know if a gang may be hanging out in some empty slaughterhouse who might mess with you or try to pick a fight or mug you, or just try to take an empty malt liquor bottle and bash your skull in, you know. Anyway, these are the thoughts that go through my head as I walk this region, and they keep me on my toes until I reach the point where houses become fewer and fewer and the bayou begins. This is where the dirt road leading to my house is, and that's where I find myself this night, on foot. I look down the narrow road. You can only see so far before it fades into misty darkness. I resented that I would have to spend the next hour walking its distance until I reached home. But anger took hold of fear when I thought about how all of this could be spared if not for the neglect and carelessness of my roommate. When I got home, I was really going to have it in for him. I truly considered at the time the possibility of physically smacking his face. And with this thought in mind, I launched defiantly down the road. The further I walked, the darker it became, until no light shined but the stars and a sliver of the moon above me. Very soon, the sound of any vehicle was completely non-existent. There was just me, the road, and the bayou. I heard the crickets chirp and the frogs croak and the occasional bird coo. To avoid fear, I focused on their chorus and let their sounds preoccupy my mind. I walked, watching my shoes press into the sandy dirt as I placed one foot in front of the other. I would count my steps until I reached 100, and then I'd begin again. I tried to lose myself in the repetition. My shoes became damper and damper, and I felt the soles of my feet become moist. I stopped counting to ponder whether I should smack my roommate with a wet sock, but my thought was interrupted when I glanced upon, for a moment, the night sky. Or is it a silhouette? What is that? A sharp panic seized my heart and I became very nervous. A long distance up ahead of me, I could discern the soft silhouette of a figure. It was so far away that I couldn't tell whether it was moving ahead or in my direction. I froze. and I could feel the blood gushing in my temples. What were the chances of there being someone malicious wandering the street at night looking to rob me or pick a fight? This was the reassuring thought I had as I tried to convince myself that I was safe. I tried to keep calm, to not let my nerves get the best of me. I mean, whoever this was probably was just as frightened of me as I was of them, if they had already detected me, that is. I didn't know what to do. Run? There was only two directions. Continue walking? What were the risks? As I stood there, I saw that the figure was indeed moving in my direction, and its form was becoming more defined. And this was the time I began to notice how awkward it was moving. The figure didn't walk normal at all. It didn't bob up and down like how a normal person looks like as they walk. What is that coming towards me? It would seem from my perspective, moved in short, quick, jerking movements. And I could see from what light was present how its twitchy limbs projected from its torso, and how it was getting closer. Oh Lord, it's getting closer. Its head stuck out from a neck that was longer than any human neck should be, and how at this time I could now faintly hear the noises that it seemed to make. The sound of suckling, and how it was moving quicker. Its face lifted, and I could see its eyes glare like glowing yellow beads. These wide, beady eyes locked onto me, staring at me, and it stopped. We both were there, motionless, yards away, looking at each other. It squealed violently, and the sound resounded through the bayou. The chirping and croaking of crickets and frogs stopped. Everything stopped, even my heart for a brief moment. Literally, the rumbling and humming was all that could be heard afterwards. The rumbling and humming of a motor ahead, a vehicle speeding towards us, tires racing loudly. The thing in front of me hunched over and turned to see the headlights beaming our way. It hissed, getting down on all fours, only pausing for a moment to turn back towards me, gawking at me with its wide eyes before crawling hastily into the swamp. That very vehicle that scared the thing away was my roommate's car. He never saw it, whatever it was, and I never wanted to see it again. I moved as soon as I could, and haven't been there ever since.